They repeat over and over, refusing to leave my mind. My name is Zenobia Washington. I'm 59 years old, and this is a story I kept buried for months, until staying silent hurt more than speaking out. What happened that night changed how I see everything. It happened at my son Orion's wedding reception. In front of everyone, his new mother-in-law Serafina hurled a bowl of steaming gumbo straight at my face. The heat shocked me, my eyes stung, and the soup soaked into my light silk blouse. But the worst part wasn't the mess or the pain. It was her expression. She smiled calmly, almost proudly, as if this moment had been planned for a long time. She looked right at me and said again, slowly and clearly, "That's what you deserve." The room went completely quiet. Guests avoided my eyes and stared at their tables. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. No one, except my son. Orion, my only child, the son I raised by myself after his father walked away, sat at the head table with his arms folded. In a steady voice he said, "She's right, Mama." In that instant it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. My chest tightened and the air felt heavy, but I stayed still. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask a single question. I picked up the napkin from my lap, gently wiped my face, and stood up as calmly as I could. With my back straight and my head high, I walked toward the doors, even though my hands were shaking inside. Every step felt heavy, but I kept moving. Before leaving the building, I paused. I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and called a number I had saved weeks earlier. When the call connected, I said just 3 words, "It's time." Then I ended the call. I walked out quietly and closed the door behind me. No one came after me. No one asked if I was okay. I got into my car, turned the key, and drove through the dark streets of Buckhead toward my small apartment in the West End. As the city lights passed by, one question kept repeating in my mind: how did my life end up here? There was a time when Orion hugged me and called me his hero. A time when I believed a mother and son shared a bond that nothing could break. I trusted that love completely. But that night, with my face still burning and my heart in pieces, I learned a painful truth. Sometimes, the deepest hurt comes from the people we love the most. What happened after that phone call is something they will never forget. But before I explain that, you need to know how everything began. How a mother who gave her whole life ended up being shamed in front of strangers. And how I learned far too late that my own son was hiding a truth that would turn my world upside down. That we don't always realize it at the time, but sometimes we place our trust in the wrong people. And when that trust breaks, the pain stays with us. Have you ever been let down by someone you loved deeply? If you have, share your story in the comments. I truly want to hear it. 3 years ago, my life looked very different. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and it was mine. I lived in a roomy apartment in Atlanta's West End, with a balcony filled with red geraniums and bougainvillea that I cared for every single morning. That small routine gave me joy and a sense of control. My days followed a simple rhythm. Strong coffee at 7, a sweet potato pastry from Mr. Henderson's bakery on the corner, and then I opened my little tailoring shop on the ground floor of the building. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had enough. I never felt poor because I lived within my means and with pride. When Orion's father left us, my son was just 5 years old. From that moment on, I learned a lesson that shaped my entire life. A woman can carry herself through life using her own strength. I didn't wait for help. I didn't ask for permission. I just worked. I made wedding dresses, prom gowns, and elegant blouses for church women who wanted to look refined without showing off. I knew fabric the way others know faces. Every stitch mattered. Every detail had a purpose. When treated with care, fabric tells you what it needs. Orion saw all of it. He watched me wake up before sunrise to finish orders. He saw me work until my fingers cracked and bled. He saw me cry quietly beside my old sewing machine, the one passed down from my grandmother, and then straighten my back and continue working. "Mama, one day I'll work hard so you can rest," he used to say while I cooked his breakfast before school. His eyes were serious, full of promise. I believed him without question. He was a good child. Kind. Responsible. He studied on his own, brought home good grades, and never gave me trouble. On Sundays he helped clean the shop and asked about fabrics and colors, about how I knew what each customer wanted. "Because I listen," I told him once. "People always tell you what they need, even when they don't say it out loud." He would nod, thinking it over, and then run off to play basketball with the neighborhood boys. When Orion turned 18 and was accepted into Morehouse College to study business administration, I felt every sacrifice had meaning. My son was heading toward a life I never had. A degree. A career. A future that didn't depend on worn hands or aching joints. That I worked harder than ever. Double shifts. Late nights. Dresses for families who would never invite me to sit beside them but who paid well. I saved every dollar. I refused loans. I denied myself rest. Also, Orion could graduate without owing anyone anything. And he did. He finished with honors. He landed a job at a respected real estate firm. He earned well and wore suits I tailored just for him. Every Sunday he came for lunch with flowers in his hands. "Thank you, Mama," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Everything I am is because of you." In those moments I felt whole. Complete. Like my life had purpose. That feeling lasted until he met Clementina. The first time Orion spoke her name, I heard something new in his voice. A softness. A glow I had never noticed before. His eyes shined in a way that told me everything was about to change. Even if I didn't yet understand how, Orion told me, "She's special, Mama." And that was how Clementina entered my life. The only daughter of a wealthy Buckhead family with a father who owned several hardware stores and a mother, Serafina, who had never worked but spoke with sharp authority. When Orion asked me to meet her, I dressed with care in my navy blue embroidered dress and my mother's pearl earrings, hoping to make a good impression, even though the Buckhead restaurant he chose felt far too grand for me. Clementina arrived looking perfect in white, polite but distant, speaking about her design work and future wedding plans, and when she called me Miss Zenobia, something inside me tightened, though I ignored it because I still trusted my son. 3 months later they invited me to dinner at their home, and that night revealed more than words ever could. Their massive house felt cold and untouchable. Serafina greeted me with hollow kindness. Clementina repeated that same empty politeness, and her father barely noticed I was there. A quiet housekeeper served dinner while being treated as invisible, and Orion moved through that home with a comfort that stung more than I expected. As Serafina spoke proudly about her social circle, luxury trips, and expensive purchases, I sat silently, realizing for the first time that I wasn't welcomed as family but observed as someone who didn't quite belong. Serafina smiled lightly and joked that one can't just drive any old car if one wants to keep a certain image, and I nodded politely while Clementina squeezed Orion's arm and said that once they married, he would need a bigger, better car because his current one was too modest. Especially if they planned to have children, adding that her father could help with the payment. My stomach tightened because I remembered how hard Orion had worked to buy that car himself. And when I calmly said I trusted my son to know what was best for him, Serafina finally looked straight at me and replied that of course he would make the right choices. For his new family, a phrase that quietly pushed me out of his future. Orion stayed silent, focused on his plate, and I realized with a deep ache that he was allowing them to edge me aside. Serafina then spoke confidently about the wedding, already decided down to the cathedral and an elegant reception. And though no one asked my opinion, she suddenly turned to me and asked if I approved, forcing me to smile and say that happiness was what mattered most. She raised her glass and spoke about starting life without burdens, a word that lingered heavily, and when Clementina left the table and Reginald dozed off, Serafina leaned toward me and explained in a low, firm voice that Orion now belonged to their family and needed to focus on the future, not the past, gently but clearly suggesting that a good mother knows when to step back. I told her I had never been a burden to my son, and she smiled as if agreeing while making it clear that his priorities had changed. Then the moment passed when Clementina returned and dessert was served, untouched by me. As we left, Serafina handed me a small box containing an elegant china teacup, polished and cold, and later in the car Orion asked if I liked his future mother-in-law, but when I looked at him I saw that the boy who once called me his hero was gone. I answered carefully, stepped out of the car and climbed the stairs to my quiet apartment, where I later held that perfect teacup in my hands and understood that it was never meant as a gift, but as a reminder of where I now stood. It wasn't a gift at all. It was a message, a quiet way of saying I didn't belong in their world, so I left the teacup untouched on the table and reached instead for my old stoneware mug, the one I had used every morning for years, the one that truly felt like mine. As I drank my coffee in silence, a troubling thought began to grow inside me. How far would this woman go to push me out of my son's life? I didn't have the answer yet, but it wouldn't take long to find out. In the months that followed, life felt painful and unsteady, like taking careful steps while pretending nothing hurt, telling myself this was normal, that mothers must step back when sons prepare for marriage, even though deep down I felt myself being pulled away rather than gently released. Orion's visits slowly faded, from every Sunday to every few weeks, then to rare rushed moments filled with apologies that always included Clementina or Serafina. And though I said I understood, something inside me quietly broke each time. Then one day Orion called and said Clementina wanted me to join them to choose her wedding dress, and hope returned for the first time in weeks, making me believe maybe I had been wrong. I arrived early at the elegant boutique, but Clementina showed up late with Serafina and friends who laughed loudly and treated the visit like a show, while I sat quietly on a velvet sofa, unseen and unheard. When Clementina finally asked my opinion, I offered a gentle, honest suggestion, only to be met with cold looks and polite mockery, and in seconds my voice no longer mattered. Serafina decided everything. Clementina smiled in agreement, and I noticed once again that she called Serafina Mama, while I remained Miss Zenobia. Outside, Orion praised her beauty, and when he finally asked what I thought, I smiled and said the dress was lovely, swallowing the words I longed to say. As Serafina took my son's arm and led him away to discuss wedding plans, I stood there holding my purse, feeling invisible, realizing that step by step I was being quietly erased. When Clementina asked if I was coming too, Serafina quickly answered for me, saying I must be tired and that the discussion would be too detailed to interest me, and Orion stayed silent, offering no defense, no protest, not even a glance before kissing my cheek and walking away with them, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk where, for the first time, a few quiet tears escaped before I wiped them away and took the bus home to save money. Back in my apartment, I made coffee in my old stoneware mug, the one that felt like home, while the untouched china cup sat on the table like a warning I refused to accept, because I still believed my son would remember who I was to him. I kept smiling through exclusion, kept saying everything was fine, kept swallowing my hurt so I wouldn't become the problem they hinted I was. When Orion invited me to dinner 2 weeks later, I arrived early and hopeful, dressed carefully only to find Clementina already there, dominating the conversation with talk of luxury trips, expensive gifts and a Buckhead condo, while Orion smiled beside her. Then came the moment that broke something inside me, when he asked to borrow money I didn't have and I handed it over anyway, knowing I would never see it again, realizing I had become his backup plan instead of his mother. That night, alone by the window with my coffee, I wondered how a lifetime of sacrifice could lead to such silence, not knowing yet that this pain was only the beginning, that plans were already in motion without me. As the wedding drew closer, Orion's calls faded into rushed conversations and empty promises, and I learned about celebrations I was never invited to, understanding at last that I wasn't slowly drifting away. I was being deliberately left behind. No one told me about the rehearsal dinner either, an elegant gathering at an expensive Italian restaurant with close family and godparents, and when I finally asked Orion why I hadn't been included, he grew uneasy and said it was last minute and they didn't want to bother me, as if my presence were an inconvenience instead of a mother's place. I stayed quiet again, smiling and pretending I understood, until one slow Tuesday afternoon at my shop changed everything. A delivery arrived, just a plain envelope with my name written in black ink, and the moment I opened it my stomach tightened. Inside were photographs of Orion in different places, laughing, touching, standing far too close to a woman who was not Clementina but Serafina. Each image stole more air from my lungs. A hand at her back, faces inches apart, then the two of them entering a hotel together, and finally a night photo on a balcony where Orion held her like a lover while she leaned into him with closed eyes. My body gave out before my mind could catch up and I collapsed in the bathroom, sick with disbelief and heartbreak, realizing the truth I had refused to see. This wasn't cruelty without reason. It was secrecy, control, and betrayal woven together. Serafina hadn't pushed me away because I was unworthy, but because I was the one person who truly knew my son, the one who could see what she had turned him into. When I finally stood up, washed my face and returned to the shop, something inside me had shifted. The shaking stopped, the tears dried, and as I gathered the photos and sat before my sewing machine, I felt a cold clarity take hold. The pain was still there, but beneath it was something stronger, sharper, and ready to act, because for the first time, I understood that what was happening to me was not an accident. It was a plan. As the wedding drew closer, I thought about Clementina, unaware that the man she planned to marry was betraying her with her own mother, and I thought about myself. The woman who had worked until her hands cracked, who had endured disrespect in silence, who had believed a son's love could never fade, and I realized that version of me was gone. In her place stood someone awake, someone done with quiet suffering. I called a number I had saved months earlier, a private investigator recommended by a former client, and for the first time my voice did not shake as I asked for proof, details, dates, and truth about Orion Washington and Serafina Vance. When the investigator warned me that some truths hurt more than lies, I told him pain no longer mattered. I needed facts. Days later, I met him in a small cafe far from familiar faces, where he laid out photos, records, and reports that shattered any remaining doubt. Secret apartments paid for by Serafina, hotel stays booked in her name, and a relationship that had been going on for over a year, long before any engagement. Then came the bank records, large transfers of money sent regularly to my son, and in that moment I understood the full depth of the betrayal. This was not just secrecy or desire. It was control, dependence, and manipulation. As I sat there listening, something hardened inside me, not with anger but with clarity. The wedding was not the ending I had feared. It was only the beginning. I was no longer the woman kept in the dark. I was the woman who knew the truth, who waited patiently, and who would act at the right moment. Because once you see everything clearly, silence is no longer an option. I sat in stunned silence as Booker laid out the truth. The hardware chain Orion had always boasted about was on the verge of collapse, his father-in-law drowning in debt, and the Buckhead house burdened with 3 mortgages. So it's all a lie? I whispered. Booker nodded. A carefully built facade, now crumbling, and Serafina was exploiting it. He explained that Clementina had inherited a fortune from her grandmother. Millions locked in a trust that only became fully accessible once she married. And if anything happened to her, it would automatically go to her husband. My chest tightened. Fine. My son would inherit everything. The investigator spoke gently, but the words hit like blows. My son was under Serafina's control, manipulated, and she was using him to gain access to Clementina's fortune. Then he handed me a small audio device. I froze as I heard Orion's voice, nervous, asking how they would keep Clementina from finding out, followed by Serafina's calm, seductive tone promising Clementina wouldn't be a problem for long, hinting at accidents, a plan I couldn't believe I was hearing. My stomach dropped. My own son, the boy I had raised with love and honesty, was complicit in a scheme to exploit and potentially harm an innocent woman for money. Booker's quiet question broke the silence. What are you going to do, Ms. Washington? I looked at the photos, the documents, the bank statements, proof of a conspiracy so twisted it seemed unreal. I don't know, I whispered, my voice shaking. He suggested going to the police, but I couldn't bear the thought of sending my son to prison. We both knew the consequence. Years behind bars for him and me, the one who had raised him, the one who would have put him there. Booker gave me his card, told me to call when I decided, and left, leaving me alone with the evidence, my heartbreak, and a choice I never imagined I would face. I remained in that coffee shop for hours, clutching the folder as if my entire life were turning to dust in my hands, thinking about every possible move, going to the police, warning Clementina, confronting Orion and demanding answers. But I did none of it, because what I wanted was not quick justice but understanding and consequences that would speak for themselves. I needed Orion to truly see what he had become, to feel the full weight of his choices, and I needed Serafina to lose everything she had gained through manipulation, without anyone ever being able to paint me as the villain. I was not going to be the mother who destroyed her son. I was going to be the mother who stepped aside and let him destroy himself, hoping that when he reached the lowest point he might remember who he once was and who I had been to him. With that resolve, I put the folder into my purse, left the cafe with my head held high, and accepted what was coming. The wedding was in 2 weeks and I would attend. The night arrived exactly as I expected, not as a celebration but as a turning point, and I dressed with quiet care in a simple navy dress I had sewn years earlier, my hair neatly pinned back, my mother's pearl earrings resting against my neck, because dignity mattered to me in that moment. The cathedral was filled with flowers, candles, and guests who barely noticed me sitting alone far from the front, while Clementina's family filled the church and only a few distant relatives represented ours. When Orion walked toward the altar, polished and confident in a suit he hadn't paid for, I saw a glimpse of the boy he once was, and for a brief second my resolve wavered, until I saw Serafina, flawless and commanding, watching him with unmistakable ownership, and him returning that look without shame. Clementina entered glowing with happiness, unaware of the truth, and every word spoken about love and trust felt heavy with falsehood as Orion promised devotion I knew he didn't mean. When they were declared married, the applause rose around me while I stayed still, knowing the moment was near. At the lavish reception, seated at the back and ignored, I watched Serafina direct everything with subtle authority and Orion respond to her looks when Clementina wasn't watching. And when it came time for the mother and son dance, I took his hand, met his forced smile, and quietly asked if he was truly happy. For the first time that night something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps guilt, and when I mentioned Serafina's name his grip tightened, his body stiffened, and I knew without a doubt that everything was exactly as I feared, and that the truth was ready to do what it always does in the end. I didn't hesitate. As Serafina humiliated me with the boiling gumbo, as Orion stood there agreeing with her, as Clementina cried and the guests whispered, I wiped my burning face with a napkin, held my head high, and walked toward the exit with quiet, unshakable dignity. Before leaving the ballroom I took out my phone, dialed the number I had saved for months and said only 3 words, "It is time." I hung up, got into my car and drove through the dark streets to my apartment, my dress ruined, my soul bruised, yet a small, cold smile crossed my face because the call wasn't to the police or a lawyer. It was to someone far more powerful. Cornelius Estrada, Clementina's grandfather, the man who controlled her inheritance and would not tolerate lies or betrayal. I had met him months ago at a family gathering when I had been invisible in the corner. He had sat next to me asking about my life and I had answered simply about my sewing shop. That night as I changed into my worn cotton pajamas, brewed coffee in my stoneware mug and looked out at the city lights, I knew that what was coming would start that very night and Serafina, Orion, and everyone who had humiliated me would never forget it that I told him I make dresses and do alterations, and his eyes lit up as he said he respected people who work with their hands because they carry real character and heart. We talked through the entire lunch and he shared his life story, how he once sold tools from a truck, worked endless long days for decades, built a successful business and still missed his late wife every single morning. With quiet sadness he admitted his daughter rarely visited him and cared more about status than family, while his granddaughter still showed him genuine affection, which is why he had left everything to her. Before we parted he gave me his card and told me to call if I ever needed help and I kept it close. Weeks later, after everything came to light, I went to his modest, memory-filled home and showed him all the proof, and I watched his face change as he understood the danger his granddaughter was in. When he asked why I hadn't gone to authorities, I answered honestly, I couldn't be the one to destroy my own child, no matter how deeply I had been hurt. He agreed to step in not out of revenge but to protect the innocent and stop the damage, warning me that the truth would cost me dearly. I accepted without hesitation. That night as I sat alone with my coffee waiting, the phone finally rang and his calm voice confirmed it was done. He had arrived with legal support, protected his granddaughter, frozen the money, and exposed the truth, ending the illusion once and for all, even though the emotional damage would take time to heal. That it's not your fault, Zenobia, Cornelius said with a steady voice. It is my daughter's fault and that boy's fault. He explained how Orion had tried to defend himself, insisting it was all a lie. But when confronted with the undeniable proof he froze, standing in his groom's suit while whispers and stares surrounded him. Serafina had tried to deny everything, claiming the photos and recordings were fake, but no one believed her and the scandal erupted spectacularly. Guests panicked, hotel staff were bewildered and Reginald, as useless as ever, slept through it all. That same night, Clementina was placed under Cornelius's protection, the marriage was annulled and her trust was frozen. Legal action was filed against Serafina for fraud, extortion and conspiracy to commit murder, with a solid case expected to put her behind bars. Orion, stripped of everything, left the hotel alone at 2 a.m., scorned by all with no money, family or reputation. I felt a swirl of emptiness, sadness, relief, guilt and quiet satisfaction, knowing I had done what was right, not revenge but justice, for Clementina, for myself and for my son, who needed to face the consequences of his choices. For the first time in months I slept peacefully, free from nightmares and that familiar knot in my stomach, understanding that sometimes the deepest love is allowing someone to hit rock bottom, even if it means losing them forever. In the days after, silence reigned. Orion didn't call, didn't reach out and I didn't seek him, letting him and myself process the fallout, while Cornelius kept me updated on Clementina, who was receiving intensive emotional care. She fell into a deep depression after discovering that the man she had married was having an affair with her own mother. A betrayal so vast and twisted that even Cornelius said neither he nor his granddaughter could truly comprehend it. Clementina was fragile, painfully so, but young, and with time there was hope she would heal. Meanwhile, the scandal spread through the city like wildfire as a video of the confrontation at the St. Regis went viral, showing Orion leaving alone in his rumpled suit, Serafina screaming at lawyers, and Clementina being taken out on a stretcher, prompting endless speculation. Some painting Orion as a manipulated victim, others as a greedy opportunist, when in truth he was a weak man who made unforgivable choices because he lacked the courage to say no. Within weeks, the district attorney formally accepted the case against Serafina, with recordings strong enough to put her at risk of 8 to 15 years in prison, while Reginald, exposed as a negligent bystander, lost his home and business and was left living alone on a meager pension. 3 weeks later, Orion finally came to my door one evening, unrecognizable with his hollow eyes, unkempt hair and broken posture, begging to talk. Against my better judgment and the anger in my heart, I let him in, and as he sat in the same chair where my world had first shattered, he apologized through tears, for me, for Clementina. But when he tried to blame Serafina's manipulation for his actions, claiming she convinced him he was worthless without her and that he deserved more than the life I had given him, each word cut like a blade, because in that moment I saw not the boy I raised, but the man he had chosen to become. He admitted in a quiet voice that he believed her, and when I asked why he trusted her instead of me, he confessed that she gave him things he felt I never could, not just money but attention, praise and a sense of importance, while he claimed I made him feel guilty simply by being myself, with my small apartment, worn clothes and tired hands reminding him of where he came from. In that moment I realized he hadn't left me out of cruelty, but because he couldn't face his own roots, and Serafina offered him an escape into a world where he could feel powerful and admired. I told him the sad truth was that I never tried to make him feel guilty. His guilt came from knowing he had abandoned me, and though he apologized and spoke of losing his job, his reputation, and discovering that the promises of wealth were lies and debts, I felt no pity for the woman now facing the consequences of her actions. When he asked to stay with me, desperate and broken, I refused, explaining that saving him now would only stop him from learning, and that he needed to rebuild his life the hard way, just as I once had, even if he believed he wasn't strong enough yet. As he left, telling me he loved me, I answered honestly that love without respect means nothing, and when the door closed and his footsteps faded, I didn't cry, because I knew I had done the most difficult but necessary thing, choosing truth, boundaries and self-respect over comfort, while quietly reflecting that the woman who once thought herself untouchable had finally been brought low by her own choices. She shook her head, eyes glistening, and said, "No, Miss Zenobia. I do. If you hadn't acted, if you hadn't warned my grandfather, I don't know what would have happened. I don't think I'd even be here." I smiled faintly, stirring my coffee, feeling the familiar warmth seep into my hands. "You're stronger than you think, Clementina. You survived because you didn't let them define you. That strength was always inside you." She looked around the shop at the scraps of fabric and the quiet, steady rhythm of my life. "I see that now. You've taught me more than I ever imagined. About courage, about standing up for what's right, about dignity." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. "Remember this, child. Life doesn't always reward the cunning or the ruthless. Sometimes it rewards patience, truth, and the quiet strength to endure. You've seen it. You've lived it." Clementina reached out and took my hand gently. "I want to learn from you, Miss Zenobia. I want to be someone who can make the right choices, even when it's hard. Even when it costs me." I squeezed her hand, my heart softening. "Then you already have. Just don't forget that the world may test you in ways you can't imagine. But if you stand firm with honesty and courage, you'll always find your way." We sat there in silence for a while, the soft hum of the shop around us, the light falling through the window onto the spools of thread, the worn wooden floor, the scattered fabric pieces. It wasn't grandeur or wealth that mattered. It was life lived with integrity and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that no one could ever take away what had been earned through truth and strength. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of everything lift just a little. Because even in a world of betrayal and greed, there were still victories worth cherishing. And this was one of them. Yes, she insisted through tears that I had saved her life, because if I hadn't called her grandfather and acted when I did, She doesn't know what would have happened, and I told her I did it because it was right, because she was a good girl who didn't deserve what was done to her. When she broke down over the fact that her own mother had planned everything, I held her and stroked her hair as a real mother would, letting her cry until she calmed, and when she asked how I survived what happened. With Orion, I admitted it hadn't been easy, that many nights I wanted to rescue him but knew that doing so would only stop him from changing, and that while I didn't know yet if he truly had, he had written months earlier saying he was working in a factory, living modestly, going to therapy and trying to be better, a letter I hadn't answered because I needed to be sure his change was for himself. Clementina told me she was doing that work too, learning not to blame herself and to trust herself. Again, and she stayed all afternoon helping me so, sharing her dream of helping abused women, before hugging me tightly and thanking me for being the mother she never had, a moment that made me cry later that night because though I had lost a son, I had gained a daughter of the heart. Months later Cornelius told me Serafina had been sentenced to 12 years in prison, alone and deteriorating, and though he felt sadness remembering the girl she once was, I understood because I remembered the boy Orion had been, and when Orion's longer, more honest letter arrived saying he was attending a support group, saving money to repay me, and hoping only that one day I wouldn't cross the street to avoid him, I realized that even without forgiveness yet, life was still moving forward, quietly teaching its hardest lessons that harmful behavior, if it helps a single girl see that strength is quiet but unyielding, then sharing my story has done its purpose. I have learned that love is not just sacrifice, it is courage. It is standing tall when everything around you wants to crush you. It is protecting those you love, even from themselves, without losing yourself in the process. Now, every morning as I hold my stoneware mug and watch the city come alive, I feel a quiet pride. Not pride in riches, not pride in status, not pride in revenge, but pride in survival, in resilience, in integrity. I see the lessons in my past, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and I know I have grown stronger because of them. I am still here. My hands are still worn from sewing, my heart still open to compassion, my mind still sharp. I have learned that dignity is not granted. It is claimed, moment by moment, decision by decision. And I have learned that forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not about condoning what was done, but about freeing yourself from its weight so you can keep moving forward. Orion may still have his journey ahead of him and Clementina hers, but I have mine too. And mine is no longer dictated by anyone else's lies, manipulations, or expectations. Mine is mine, shaped by choices, by courage, and by love that knows its limits and its truths. This is my life, my story. I survived, I endured, I learned, and I continue to rise. And in that, I have everything that truly matters. If this story helps even one person choose dignity over comfort, then everything, every tear, every sleepless night, every difficult decision has been worth it. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to all the women who have been humiliated and have chosen to stand up. To all the mothers who have had to let go of their children to save them. To everyone who has faced betrayal and chosen forgiveness without forgetting. This story is for you listening right now. For you who may be going through something similar. For you who wonder if you can survive the pain you feel today. I want you to know something. Yes, you can. You are stronger than you think. You have more courage than you imagine. And no matter how terrible it feels now, pain does not last forever. Time cures it, not erasing it but healing it. One day, maybe months or years from now, you'll wake up and realize that breathing doesn't hurt as much. That thinking about what happened no longer destroys you. That you can remember without bleeding. And on that day you'll understand that you survived. That you won. Not because you destroyed those who hurt you but because you refused to let them destroy you. I close this story holding my stoneware mug, the same one I've had for years. The one that knows the taste of my coffee on hard mornings, that has held my tears and my hopes. Never failed me. Because in the end the simplest things are the ones that remain. The humblest are the strongest. And the most overlooked are often the most valuable, like me, like you. Like all the women who have been underestimated and yet proven they are made of steel. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share my story. Remember this, life always collects its debts, not with vengeance but with truth. With time. With silent justice. And in the end, good always triumphs. Maybe not how we expected, maybe not when we expected. But it triumphs because the universe has a memory and no one escapes the consequences of their own actions. Did you like the story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story touched you, You can support the channel with a super thanks to keep these stories coming. On the screen you'll see 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.